Welcome to the Still Life podcast, a series of 21 topics, with each episode exploring the practical nature of the spiritual experience, with time-tested insights from psychotherapy, evolutionary biology, and meditation from ex-animator and stillness coach, Jim.
Because I view Jim George as a trainer for the soul. There's no better animation artist, drawer than Jim.
He is a friend, he is a mentor, incredible advisor. There's no one who's more important to me in my life.
The most interesting, most intelligent person I've ever met.
He truly is somebody who wants nothing from you and everything for you.
My name is Henry, and I'm a former client of Jim's, and the work we've done together over the past 8 years has changed my life. We're now on a mission to share these insights with you, and to draw some pretty interesting conclusions on how to live a still life.
Well, Jim, as always, it is lovely to see you.
It's great to see you, Henry. Always.
How are you today, Jim?
I'm the luckiest guy on earth, and it's just not fair. I'm doing much better than I deserve. I'm especially happy that we have some very outrageous homeless people here helping us stay focused on what it is that we're doing. Can you hear them in the background?
I hope that's aimed at the audience rather than me, because I can absolutely hear them in the background.
Well, let's hope they're not too distracting.
Let's hope so. So that's a great segue to our topic today. Today we're talking about distraction.
Yes, we are. Great topic and great timing.
Yeah, I'm really excited to dive into this.
Me too.
Because this is something that I struggle with.
Oh, we all do, Henry. Trust me.
So, as always, can you define the play space that we're in today? Can you let us know, how do you think about distraction and what does it mean to you?
Well, first of all, thanks for putting it like that. How do I think about it? Because that's all this is. It's just my sort of perspective on this stuff. And defining the play space of distraction, that's a distracting task in and of itself. And you know me, I like to go back to the word itself for clues as to what it may mean and insights that we may not always get. So distraction comes from the Latin distrahere. And in Latin, dis means apart from, or in a sense, away from. Trahere is to draw or pull. So in this case, our attention being drawn or pulled apart from or away from, and wait for it, what we were initially attracted to. Remember, the in Latin, or ad sometimes, means to or toward. So you've got attraction and you've got distraction. And I like to think of attraction and distraction almost as two poles, two extremes on a continuum of attention or awareness. And I'd like to suggest that it is really, really important because, well, attraction is focused on something, distraction is having our focus pulled away from it. Defining the play space here is really important because today's life that we're all facing, I think it's hugely important that we understand what we're up against with regard to distraction. Understand why we're up against it. Understand at least a little of how we got here. And with regard to distraction, distraction's dual potential to both enhance, because it's not all negative, it can be very helpful, as well as undermine our lives. So I hope I haven't wandered too far off in sort of laying out the play space here.
And so, as we've sort of fallen into, which I actually quite like in terms of a formula of how we kind of break down these podcasts, would you mind if I just regurgitate what I heard?
I wish you would, because I'd like to hear it myself.
Yeah. Okay, so distraction we get from the Latin, and basically you pulled it apart into its suffix and what's the main bit called?
Prefix and the actual root of the
Suffix
word.
is the end bit.
Suffix is the end bit. We don't have
So,
a suffix on
yeah,
this
we
one.
got prefix and root.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So
Suffix is always a place in England. Oh, that's Suffolk.
You don't
I'm
want to go
sorry.
anywhere near there.
I'm sorry.
Anyway, so you got the root, which is traction, or tracare, or some
Trahere.
Latin bit.
Mhm.
Trahare, yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Which is basically to stay. I wanted to say stay on track, but that's not right.
Pull,
Pull away from. That's it.
pull or draw, and in this case, because of that prefix, away from or apart from.
Brilliant. And then,
Yeah.
so you basically saw this as the opposite to attraction. They're on two different sides of a pole of awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can be attracted to something, which is drawn towards it, or you
Yes.
can be pulled away from it, which is distraction.
Yes.
And really, you made a distinction not to see distraction in the negative, because
Right.
I think that you're about to follow up and say that actually it can be helpful in certain regards.
You bet.
And attraction is maybe not always the sort of a positive, depending what you're getting attracted to.
Good for you.
So I'll pause there as well before asking my follow-up question here is, why do we have this ability to get attracted and distracted, just sort of hardwired in us from an evolutionary perspective?
Well, that's a great question in and of itself. That's probably a whole podcast. But I like to suggest from an evolutionary standpoint, our ability to shift the focus of our attention between attraction, that is, focused on a given stimulus that we're attracted to, and distraction, that is, redirecting the focus of our attention when necessary, was crucial to our survival. So crucial that we evolved a kind of subsystem within our nervous system, which we can generally refer to as a limbic system, but I want to specifically hone in on what's called the reticular activating system. I think you and I have talked about this in the past. We certainly, when we were doing our programs at Still Life, talked about it. This system that enables us to pay attention to all of this stimuli, an almost infinite amount of stimuli that's out there, to determine and prioritize that stimuli, almost all of which is irrelevant to us at any given time, some of which is important, but very, very particular stimuli, important enough to push beyond the threshold of our conscious awareness. It's called that subliminal to liminal threshold, where we become aware of it. And I'd like to just stop and acknowledge what a neurological miracle that is, because that's going on while we're focused on something else. Remember from our focus podcast, the exclusionary as well as inclusion aspect of focus? You're focused on something, inclusive. You are excluding everything else. And yet, when it's necessary, this system pokes in there and says, no, focus on this too. That's happening at an unconscious level, and so we not only don't appreciate it, we're not even aware of it. That's a miraculous piece of evolutionary work. But can you hear the dynamic tension between those two poles? Attraction and distraction, and when necessary. How do we determine what's necessary? how do we keep from just being distracted all the time? So let's look at these things. The attraction piece. And you asked from an evolutionary standpoint. So our attention evolved to prioritize stimuli that enhanced our survival and reproduction. Almost everything focused on those things. So that meant when we noticed food, a food source, a potential food source, we noticed a potential mating opportunity. And when we noticed a potential predator, that triggered neurological pathways associated with reward, that is the good stuff, and threat detection, that is, mayday, stress, okay? That was a huge evolutionary advantage, a survival advantage. That's just huge right there, okay? Then we get to distraction, which is the ability to redirect our focus when some new, some unexpected, some urgent stimulus appears. See, that is what's amazing. That ensures our adaptability, because it's new stuff happening, and our vigilance. That means we're aware of our environment all the time. Again, even when we're totally focused on this thing over here. Again, it's a remarkable gift to have both of those states, focus and vigilance, happening, and yet we're only conscious of what we're focused on. So this attraction, motivating us toward attractive stimulus, and distraction, right, which is redirecting the focus of our attention to some new, some unexpected, some urgent stimuli. It's flagging that stimuli for our attention. And it occurred naturally, not all that often. Those two things had to be in balance, or else we wouldn't be optimal for survival. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes very lucid sense. I think that lucid sense, I don't even know if that makes lucid sense. I think that makes very good sense. So I'm going to repeat back again what I've been hearing.
Sure.
So we've got our liminal and subliminal mind, where basically we have this beautiful neurological mechanism that's working underneath our conscious awareness.
Yeah.
And we can prime our subconscious awareness to say, hey, let's look out for X, Y, and Z. So we're tagging or flagging certain stimuli that might be important. They tend to fall into two large buckets: reproducibility and survivability. It's like if they help us do those two things, they're helping pass on our DNA, which is really the prerogative of being alive.
It's what evolution's about.
From the evolutionary perspective, right?
Yeah.
And so when bucketing those things, say I'm the color red has become a threatening stimuli. I know this because the tribe next door wears red. I'm priming my subconscious mind to then look out for those cues. And then so when I'm scanning the horizon, stimuli that checks that box will be brought to my attention and distract me.
Yes.
And pull my awareness away from whatever it is I might be focusing on.
Yes.
Because that might actually have a higher priority. And so this ability to have your subconscious mind work with you to basically help to going back and forth, toggling between conscious and subconscious.
Yes.
To basically understand what it is that's worthy of paying attention to.
Brilliant.
Is really what has developed because it gave us such an advantage over time. And really this is helpful for a lot of species. They have this to some degree.
Yep.
You know, you squeeze an air horn in a dog park and you're going to get everybody's
Yes.
attention, including the animals,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Everybody will see that as a difference in stimuli, a delta, and they're not going to necessarily ignore it because it could be something threatening. Loud noises tend to
Right.
be something threatening.
Right.
So, from an evolutionary perspective, that's the mechanism that was developed, and it's, again, not good, not bad, because being attracted or distracted can be helpful in certain scenarios
That's
and not so helpful in others.
That's it.
And so I think that's a nice segue, if I'm tracking correctly.
Exactly. One minor note, it isn't everything that we consciously prime. A lot of it is primed based on evolutionary history. The loud noise piece is one.
Exactly, yeah.
So just to note, you can prime it, but also a lot of it is primed already.
Yeah, a lot of it's pre-primed.
Yep, good.
Right, okay.
Perfect.
And the
I love your mind, man. You track this stuff brilliantly.
well, no, I love yours because you lay it out and make it easy. So this actually brings me to my next question.
Yeah.
Because it seems as if in today's day and age, we've started to become more consciously aware of these mechanisms. And it seems as if, well, actually, I know it to be the case that when it comes to just business and technology in general,
Yeah.
finding the back door into this psychology and gaining attention has become the quickest way to accrue vast amounts of wealth and
Yeah.
status.
Yes.
Because if you look around and you sort of look into the different way that we measure success on even app platforms, you know, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, LinkedIn, you name it, they're looking at engagement, retention.
Good.
And these are all things that are talking about your awareness being focused on their app, right? And it's overall, there's this distractibility, and I don't necessarily know if that's going in a good direction or a bad direction. I tend to bias towards the negative because of how I find that it pulls me away from my intrinsic sense of meaning. For example, I wake up in the morning and I'm cruising through my Instagram reels like it's my bloody job, and I'm just wasting time.
Yeah.
And I find myself in a stupor almost, and that's the exact state that's incredibly beneficial to maintaining attention, because I'm not even conscious, I'm not even focused, I'm not even considering what's going on. I'm just flicking for the next giggle. So really what I want to get towards and sort of steer this conversation towards is, how do you think modern influencers have taken advantage of the distractibility that we have inherently?
So this is really the crux of the whole thing, because it's jumped our evolutionary capacity to even know what's happening. So I'd like to suggest that modern distractions are a byproduct of an evolutionary gift. This attention-driven mind of ours clashing with an environment that is increasingly designed to hijack those systems, the dopamine reward system and what we'll call the salience network. Do you remember the salience term that we used in meaning how important something is, how urgent it is? Salience. Okay? So I'd like to suggest that constant engagement of limited attention fractures our focus. It can even fracture our capacity to focus. It can lead to chronic distraction. And let me just be clear what I mean by chronic distraction. The inability to focus on anything for any amount of time and to any depth. Okay? I'm suggesting that this modern environment that we're in is literally increasingly designed to do that. And it works on cultural, it works on technological, it works on neurological levels. So let's take a moment and look at those. First, I'd like to suggest that for the first time in our evolutionary history, we have an ongoing, overwhelming overabundance of information and stimuli coming at us almost all the time, 24/7. I'd like to suggest most of us, without realizing it, are living a fair amount of our time, at least part of our time, in what's called cognitive overload. We're unable to focus because we're overloaded. Okay? That's a very important sort of state to identify in yourself if you want to work with this. Okay? From the cultural standpoint, I'd like to suggest that our culture, a consumer culture that we have called a consumer culture, that's not a pejorative term, runaway consumerism creates industries that profit from capturing and then fragmenting our attention. You just referred to it. They capture and then they fragment our attention. And they're doing this in order to generate cycles of consumption and then novelty seeking. Consumption, I'm not satisfied, I'm seeking something new to consume. I'm not satisfied, I'm seeking something new to consume. I'm not satisfied, I'm seeking something new to consume. And it's all right there in front of us. Okay? I'm suggesting that that is one of the primary engines of our economy, that cycle. Then social media, you raised the specter of social media, and I'm talking about the institution now of social media. It's an institutional phenomenon. It isn't just people using apps anymore. It's a whole institution. They profit by playing on our deep-seated need for belonging, deep-seated need for social status. And they use what's called intermittent reinforcement to keep us hooked. It's long been known for decades that if you want to train behavior in dogs, in horses, in human beings, in gerbils,
Pigeons.
Intermittent reinforcement. Don't reward each time. Reward intermittently. That really hooks the dopamine system. And the mother of all examples of that is gambling and the gambling industry. That intermittent reward, that intermittent support, reinforcement, is one of the most highly addictive things there is. It will keep you coming back because you're waiting for the next, just the next one, the next pull of that handle. The next hand is going to be a winner. Then finally, what I'm going to call industrial distraction is working neurologically. It is hijacking one of the most miraculous aspects of our neurology. what's called neuroplasticity, the capacity to change your brain based on what's happening to you and what you're doing and what you're not doing about it. In essence, modern distractions are changing your brain because repeated shifts in focus strengthen neural pathways associated with impulsivity and very superficial engagement. Okay? Very superficial engagement because you don't have time or the attention to engage. You're on to the next thing. You're on to the next thing impulsively. While weakening neurological pathways for deep focus, for deep engagement, for deep contemplation, and most importantly, deep connection. I like to suggest that on social media, we are constantly contacting one another. Yo, dude, emoji contacting at a very superficial level and mistaking that for connection. I'm suggesting we're actually starving for connection. We're actually feeling more alone, more isolated, and more disconnected because of a lot of this. And again, I'm talking about the industrialization of this. Industries designed to profit not from your well-being, but from your attention. Your attention is now a product. And that just is. That's just a state of fact. It's not a conjecture. So does that make sense? Is that?
Yes. So really everything comes at a trade-off.
Mm-hmm.
And so while these, the way that I see it is that I don't think that there is somebody at the top of one of these companies with malintent.
No.
However, I think that there's this opportunity to do something because it's cool, and watch how it grows, and like everybody around the world can now speak to each other, and there's all of these ways to surface to justify it on the surface level.
Oh, sure.
Where and those ways can actually be beneficial. It's great to be able to see my friends in England on Instagram and kind of get a feeling about what they're up to. However, I don't have a feeling of actually being deeply connected to them just because I know that they went and played a round of golf on the weekend.
That's right.
You know, and so it's this kind of bait and a switch where it hits a satisfier, but that's actually an empty means because there isn't that fulfillment of actually knowing what is this person doing, how are they doing, you know,
Yes.
how have they grown. And I think to the point that you were making earlier too, where it's all very surface level. It's all very surface level and to a lot of detriment because that scale, if we think about where these mechanisms sort of evolved from, it's a small tribe of around 120 people, right? If I'm comparing myself within that tribe to the other men my age, great, you know, envy is a good thing to like progress us further. However, if you look at the anxiety rates and the depression rates of 14-year-old girls these days, it's like you put that at scale and you're starting to compare yourself to everybody in the world. And it's not just comparing yourself to somebody in the flesh. You're comparing yourself to a highlight reel. This is a heavily edited, doctored image of, and you didn't see the 150 other images that they didn't post. It's like just right. And so now it's really distorting and playing upon these mechanisms so that not only do we not feel as connected to people when using these mechanisms, because sending people images of yourself is not being with somebody and actually laughing with somebody. It can be fun, but it's not necessarily the thing that we're really evolved to want to do, to like driven to actually want to do, create these meaningful connections with other people, right? You pair that onto this ability to compare with the whole world at mass, there's just this sense of inadequacy and loneliness too. It's an isolation. It feels isolating because I'm not getting the connective aspects, and I'm also feeling like I'm not good enough because everybody that makes it to the top of my feed, you know, the most engaging content is heavily distorted so that it is displayed to the most amount of people. Because again, you look at the other side of this, those companies are trying to get more and more engagement. So it's like, well, you know, that piece of content's doing really well from X, Y, and Z influencer. Let's spread that to everybody around so that everybody gets a higher likelihood of being hooked to it. It's scary because it's one of these things that in hindsight, it would be like, well, we probably should have regulated some of that prior to, but it moved so quickly and the incentives were so strong for a lot of people to make a lot of money quickly and to some benefit. You know, I'm really glad that this happened in Silicon Valley rather than in China, because if there was sort of negative regulation, then we could be in an even worse state of having that information being doctored for political gain more explicitly. Who knows if it's really being doctored for political gain these days? Probably is. Who knows? I don't want to get into that conversation. But anyway, I think that was just a ramble to really agree with everything that you're saying. And a couple of light bulbs went off because... Do light bulbs go off? Maybe I need to start being more attracted to the line of conversation in my head rather than constantly analyzing it in the rearview mirror. But I think all of this goes to it's very interesting to hear your opinion of this because you've seen the contrast. You know what the world was like before the dawn of this. I was 15 when the iPhone came out, so I feel like I dodged a bullet in terms of a lot of the distracting tendencies, digging into my neurology before I had more sort of cognitive control, because obviously these things grow and they iterate and they get better and better and better. The iPhone 3, you know, I had that when I was 16. And so that was nowhere near as sort of highly tuned as the iPhone 15. I'm saying all of this because I'm curious to know your thoughts on how do these distracting tendencies fold into habit creation? And I say this with the relation to being 14 and 15 because I feel as if it's easier to create habit, well, to at least understand consciously your habits when you're older because you have more cognitive mechanism to really look back and evaluate them. How has distraction affected habit formation in general, and what is your outlook from the perspective of a geezer on the future?
So there's a lot there, a lot that you just said.
You can focus on just one thing. Please don't try and swallow it all.
Well, first I'd like to suggest that distractions often reflect our cultural values. They mirror our cultural values, a lot of them. And remember from our work with values, values drive behavior. Values are most often operating at a subconscious level. So we're not aware of what our values actually are. What we're aware of is what we'd like to think our values are. And remember, there are individual, intrinsic values. There are cultural or group extrinsic values. And when we're working with values, because they're operating at a subconscious level, a great way to discover what our values actually are, both individually and culturally, is simply look carefully, objectively, at our behavior. Then trace that behavior back to the deep underlying values that gave rise to that behavior, And in order to see those values clearly, I suggest that we get the idea of right and wrong and good and bad clear off the table temporarily so that we can actually see clearly, so that we're not pre-editing because we don't want to feel like we're bad or wrong. So if we take all of the right, wrong, good, bad off the table, I'd like to suggest that our culture values speed. Our value system, okay? Our culture values novelty. And it values consumption. Remember, it values these things more than it values depth. It prioritizes those values more, above presence, being present for any length of time. And it certainly values it more than what's come to be called mindfulness. Having your mind engaged deeply for a period of time in what you're doing. So that philosophically just begs the question, if we'd like to, what is deserving of our attention? As opposed to what are we paying attention to now habitually? What deserves our attention? And I like to suggest that what we're paying attention to now is a habit, a series of habits and patterns. And remember from our habit podcast, habit is simply a conditioned behavioral response that's come into being by repetition, and all it requires is a trigger, what's called a habit cue. That is an incredibly efficient way to operate as long as that habit is serving us. When it's no longer serving us, we will continue to do that same habit if we don't intercede consciously. It'll continue by default. If that habit becomes pathological, I'd like to strongly suggest that we take the time, the energy, and the effort to consciously get in there. This will be less efficient at first, but create a new behavioral pattern based on what we want, not what is being thrown at us. That requires effort. It does. And I suggest a great way to minimize the effects of that effort. Don't try to do it all by yourself. Engage other people. Engage friends. Engage people that are in agreement with this. Wait a minute, this has gone far enough. If you repeat that new behavior enough times, it achieves what we call automaticity. It becomes automatic. It becomes a new habit that overrides the old one. And where we place our attention is no exception to that. Because I'm suggesting that we, in the end, become what we practice. So one of the reasons I like to call what we do with stillness a practice. You practice something, you get better at it, and eventually you become it. So does that tie in with your habit and pattern
I think so.
question?
So what I'm getting from this is that habits are incredibly effective at removing a lot of conscious, energetic deliberation.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are conscious of which habits you want to create,
Mm-hmm.
then you can steer them away from this imposed habit of being distractible.
Yes, but that takes effort. And in a distracted and distractible culture, that effort is in very short supply. That energy is in short supply. It really requires some intention. Yeah.
And you were mentioning that a quick way to actually bypass a lot of that effort, instead of trying to do it by yourself, identify with a group with similar values.
Yes.
Because then you are crowbarring this need for social status to actually work for you rather than against
Yeah,
you.
you're leveraging the very thing that's being leveraged against you for you. And again, I love your point. There's no one at the top of this thing, snidely whiplash saying, haha, I'm going to control the world. They're just profit motivated. It's a consumer culture. So we're not talking about fighting the evil demons. We're just talking about taking control of our attention back. That's all.
And it's much easier said than done.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the personal issues I have with distraction in general have been amplified by the ability to see it more clearly from a space of stillness.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think when we're talking about liminal and subliminal, conscious and subconscious, when you have the ability to completely stop the narrative, that to me is more expansive and is less judgmental. And so you can see things, as you were saying, more clearly without some skew or bias to not wanting to feel a certain way. You're just really observing. And for me, with my practice in the morning, when I quiet my mind, I just observe these impulses to reach towards my phone and to get these quick hits of dopamine because my neurology feels fried and empty. And I think that when comparing that to what I derive meaning from, where I get this larger sense of belonging from something outside of myself, I feel this sense of frustration when I butcher my practice because I slip on my all the time, and I'm breaking habits because of how easily distractible I am, and it's pulling me away from constructive activity towards something that I find meaningful. And so then there's just this gnawing sense at the end of the day where it's like, you could have done better. And you didn't need to eat all of that junk food. You didn't need to consume all of that junk media. You didn't need to do X, Y, and Z. And I think that it's half of the reason that I starved myself from it, because I wasn't on social media most of the time that we had this space at Still Life. It was only until it was like, oh, let's launch a podcast, and now I got to live in Instagram and YouTube and TikTok. And I was really scared because, it's a slippery slope. It's like, oh, I'm going to put my self-worth on the amount of double taps somebody hits on a piece of glass.
That's right.
And that isn't necessarily very indicative of the person that I am. And so I just think that really where I'd like to steer this is, how do you find that stillness helps to firstly shed awareness on attraction and distraction? And then how do you think that stillness can help to steer the habit formation and reformation towards activities that people might actually derive more of a sense of richness from? Because although the culture is promoting speed, and although the culture is promoting sort of shallow status, etc., if somebody doesn't feel as if that's fulfilling, how can they use a practice to regain control of their attention?
By using the practice. We've been talking. Take a breath now. Hold it. And so slowly, feather light, let that breath just trickle out through your throat and your mouth. Just notice the difference between Henry now and Henry 15 seconds ago. 15 seconds ago, Henry was distracted by his own train of thought. He wasn't here. He was thinking thoughts about that. Henry is right here, right now. This is the Henry that I know. This Henry's not distracted. This Henry's right here, present. This Henry is engaged in something that he loves, that he wants to do more of. The idea of being distracted from this is kind of repugnant. It isn't a distraction. This is the practice of stillness, not something we do once a day, sometimes. That's always a good start, but it is a daily, constant practice. And we're practicing. We're just getting better. But notice that between the two of us, we can remind one another to actually do it, not talk about it. That makes sense?
Yes, sir.
Look at you. Feel that. It's a whole different person. And who I really am, as you said, is what you practice. You keep practicing not doing this, and more who I am becomes these other things that I say I don't want, but I continue to do them.
Can you zoom in on that right
Sure.
there? I know that you've experienced this with our work together in terms of this discrepancy between what I say I want and what I do.
Sure, we all do that. I do that.
Can you just talk upon that? Because I think that that's something that I need to hear again.
Okay. I'd like to suggest that there is an entire program going on. We'll just bunch together and call it your ego. It's a narrative. It's a highly edited narrative, constantly changing to suit your needs, to just keep going day by day by day.
Stop there. When you say highly edited,
Yeah.
and can you give me an example of how somebody's ego is highly edited contextually?
It's that narrative is being edited all the time. I got still 4 times yesterday. Really? Should we go back and look at the replay? Because I don't see 4 times. I see somebody taking 30 seconds once. Oh, but as I'm telling the story to myself, I get still a lot. I get still all the time. Oh, come on. I've worked with clients who come in with a roll, a spare tire that's just got Goodyear written on it. And they're telling me they only eat salads and blah, 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 blah. Their body doesn't lie. Their ego does. And I'd like to suggest that many of them actually believe what they're saying. It just isn't true. What I'm asking is, if you can understand the power of stillness to cut through all of that and take you down underneath it to who and what you truly are, then determine what it is that you love, really love. You make that a long-term goal, and then you understand there is no long-term goal if you're being distracted every 20 seconds.
You mentioned long-term goals.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, we spoke about death.
Yes.
How do you see long-term goals as in coherence with just keeping death close to you? And do you personally have any long-term goals that you care to share? And if that's too personal a question, or also a question that's too hard to put into words, then...
Well, a lot of it would be, but it's a great question. Because I'd like to suggest that, as twisted as this may sound to somebody your age, death has become one of my best friends. Death is one of my finest teachers. And if I had known to embrace it rather than just keep pushing it away, I'd have jumped on it when I was 15. I did focus a lot of attention on it, but it was a different kind of attention. Usually, as death gets closer and closer, and I'm looking down the second barrel of a double-barrel shotgun right now, most people get more and more averse to it. I am just getting more and more welcoming to it because it's liberation from all the shit that doesn't matter. And I'm suggesting that this whole idea of a long-term goal doesn't have to be, I'm going to cure cancer before I'm 50. My long-term goal is the same long-term goal that it's been for decades now. Wherever I go, whomever I have an encounter with, I want to reduce suffering, increase well-being, and encourage a life well lived, however they define it. That isn't a bunch of boxes to tick off. It's not some bucket list. It's a process that is going on right now. It's why I'm not going to be distracted from it. I love it. It's literally informing everything I think, feel, say, and do. And death is right there saying, don't forget, Kev. Don't forget. And I don't. As opposed to, oh yeah, yo dude.
So, if meaning is a feeling that we get when we're connected to something larger.
Okay, it is certainly felt as a meaning. I'm not sure meaning is a feeling.
So meaning is felt.
It is felt, yeah.
Okay. And that sensation, that feeling of meaning to you is so important in your value stack. And it's mainly derived from seeing other people come to conclusions about themselves, growth, intrinsic just appreciation for what it is to be alive. So basically you're deriving so much meaning from that, and also knowing that death is around the corner at any point. That it's like, okay, I just want to focus on this process. And there may be goals to put on that, but really, it's not a finite thing. You don't cross a finish line. It isn't you don't score a goal.
That's right.
Right? It's not
They're almost tactics rather than a goal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it keeps you oriented towards doing the most of that. And it's a long arc. This isn't, I just need to do it once tomorrow.
Right.
Because it's something that you intrinsically love. That in itself is a belief system that you hold within yourself, that it's like, I believe this to be the case, so I'm going to optimize for this at every opportunity I can, which then informs your habits, what you focus on, and ultimately holding that next to control, which is a similar sort of force as death, in the sense where it's like, hey, it might all go out the window anytime soon. Control's reminding you, hey, you can only do so much. You can only focus on these small aspects that are actually in your control and navigate in that direction.
That's right.
Rather than trying to control the universe to conspire for you. That's a fool's errand. So to me, that sort of makes very clear sense as to why it is that I don't feel as if you get distracted very easily, because that clarity to you results in a simplicity. That simplicity makes decision making very easy, because then you don't need to have social media. You don't need to do X, Y, and Z. You don't want to turn on the TV every 3 minutes and sort of get distracted by things. It's more so, I know what I need to do. I know what I love. I know how to do it. I just need to do it. And it's going to take conscious will and effort.
Yes.
Because there are going to be a lot of things that are going to pull my attention, or at
Yes.
least attempt to pull my attention in directions that might not necessarily be coherent for what it is that I feel as if I'm here to do on earth before I die.
It's exactly right. Exactly right. And I'd like to suggest that being process-oriented, ironically, keeps you in one eternal present moment. It isn't long-term or short-term. This is what I do. I'm just doing it. It's an ongoing process, and pretty soon it's doing me.
And some of the symptoms that come from this are absolve fear. How would I say, like, absolution? You know what I mean? It's like
Absolution.
an absolution.
I don't know.
I don't know either, evidently. But you don't have a fear of death, it seems, or just a very mitigated fear of death, because there's a visceral fear where if I...
Well, my body's going to flop around. That's going to happen because it's engineered to do that.
Yeah, like I'm certain that you would release a lot of adrenaline if I jumped over this table and tried to strangle you,
Sure,
right? But
sure.
like, you don't have this irking sort of paranoia of
Right,
death
right.
per se.
Right.
You can look at it and actually, you've said before, where it's like someone puts a gun to the back of your head, you say, just don't make a mess.
Yeah.
And so this feeling of having done your best to satisfy the process of meaning has this secondary effect of, I've done what I need to do. I'm doing what I need to do. And
Yes.
so you can turn the lights out and I've done it.
Yes.
And there's no sort of like, don't stop. You know,
Yes,
like I
yes.
need to stay a couple more days.
Sure.
It's more so like, great, now it's my time to go off.
Yeah.
And so I think that makes a lot of sense, because it also gives you a deep sensation of peace. And I believe that to be coherent with what you say, because you say that peace is your number one value.
Yeah. With a bullet.
And
Yeah.
it seems as if that's the case because of the sort of hairy train of logic that took me to that conclusion.
It's true.
I wish there were more people like you in this world, Jim.
Well, I don't know. You better think twice about that. I think a lot of what I'm saying flies in the face of what people are attracted or distracted to want.
Well, yes and no. I think that there's something beautiful and very ironic about putting all of this information on social media, because it seems sort of countercultural to do so, right?
That was very kind of you to put it like that. Yeah,
But
I agree.
I think that it's great that people have exposure to you as a mimetic model, to know that there is a different way to live life. Here's sort of your blueprint on how to do it.
Yeah.
Because each one of these topics has been another sort of tour de force in very succinct, accurate frameworks for just living life with stillness. You know, I think that that's such a key point, that the stillness bit it really just gives you more conscious control.
It does.
That is the biggest winner right there. And that should actually fit really neatly in Western society, but it takes effort. So it's like, okay, you know, it's 10 minutes a day. Are you kidding?
Sure.
I don't have 10 minutes a day in this overload, crazy society.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm getting distracted. What I wanted to get to is that I think it's actually quite beautiful that this information is going on these social media platforms, because I think that it serves to see if these things, which I'm not sure, I'm sort of neutral whether they're good or they're bad, in terms of whether I think that they're not going anywhere.
Can I suggest something about the good or the bad part?
Yeah.
Try substituting desirable or undesirable based on your intrinsic values rather than extrinsic distractions or, I don't know, manipulation.
Yeah, I think ultimately what I've been really struggling with recently is expectation.
Okay?
And
Expectation of what?
there's something that I'm getting more and more either numb to or at peace with,
Okay?
which is sort of unrecognized effort,
Mm-hmm.
and unrecognized in the sense that's measured by a lot of these sorts of more external values-driven metrics that are outcome-oriented and out of my control.
Okay?
And so I think to the point that you were making, there's a sort of reluctant desire to engage with a lot of these social media platforms, because it's like, yeah, I would love for this to go to be out in the world and to be seen as something that's genuinely beneficial, and people will actually spend the time to try and ingest this information and then employ it within their life. You know, that to me is like really important. However, when creating that belief, the way it's so easy to measure how that does, and that flies in the face of whether I actually desire wanting to get into that game, because
Good for you.
You've got a nice little moat around you, in the
And I
sense.
dig it out every day.
That's right. But
Yeah.
like, in order for this to meet people where they are now, it's like somebody's got to cross the bridge and go into the bloody wilderness.
Yeah.
And it's a rough world out there.
Yeah.
It'll kick the shit out of you.
Yes.
And so when you say,
What happens when the shit's all gone, Henry? It's been kicked clear out of you. What's left?
spirit,
Light, spirit. Yeah. Yeah.
consciousness.
Yes.
And I think that, well, to touch upon the point of like whether it's desirable or not, my expectations in terms of, you know, having this be shared, wow, God. I should go to some elocution school or something, or just like retake English 101, because especially today, it's just been awful. Anyway, that was a nice distraction. I think that what I've learned, especially in this last week, is although I may say that I don't have a lot of expectations about what I'm entitled to in my future, when something that I believe to be truly special is not seen in the way that I see it, and doesn't necessarily have the legs that I think that I think it's entitled to, it's like, there's so much expectation there. And when I get still, it's like, how am I meant to control that? Why would I want to control that? Why is that even necessary? However, it's one thing to acknowledge, it's a completely different thing to feel. And I can acknowledge that as being objectively true. And over time, as I progressively acknowledge more of that, there's like this deepening of feeling sense. And that is kicking the shit, right? It's getting the shit away, because at first it's like, yeah, you're acknowledging it, but you feel differently. So there's some subconscious stuff that's going on there. But I think that ultimately, I choose to do it in the sense that I think that these 21 topics are really an expose of your mind. And I think that has been so beneficial for me, just growing up into manhood, and to be able to open up and expose myself. That it's just been so important to really learn all of these things about me, and to not live into such a darkened world, that I think it's really important to try and share this as widely as possible. But in order to share it as widely as possible, that to me is like, is that part of the sickness? You know, is that part of this cancerous growth that is not necessarily good for the world? I don't know. And so like, you can see this, you can feel this conflict, because from one perspective, it's like, no, absolutely, that is important. You should derive meaning from this. However, on the other side of it, it's like, should it be? Should it actually be more just process oriented? You know, I do derive so much of what I love from this discourse and from a lot of the processes, the camera equipment, you know, the editing process, the designing and building web pages for consumption. Like, there's so much stuff that I'm in love with, but...
And it's showing. It's showing more and more. And I'd like to suggest that if you just take a step back and breathe, okay, you want to share this as widely as possible. Okay, how widely is possible right now? Absolutely as widely as it's being shared. We can't control it. But I will say that I personally don't want this to be turned into another fad that comes and goes in an endless algorithmic chain of passing fads. It's not a part of that system. So the degree to which it's not a part of that system is the degree to which it will or won't make that algorithm jump up and dance. But the people who are connecting with it, they're connecting, not contacting. They're staying with it. They're using it. They're practicing it. And they're becoming it. That's all I can hope for. And I can't tell you how grateful I am that you're willing to do what you're doing, because what that's doing is it's making it available. But unlike a lot of the distraction generating mechanisms in industries, I'm not trying to sell this to anybody. I just want it made available to them. If they want it, they're going to run with it, and they're going to thrive. If they don't, or if they don't yet, that's okay. But it's when we're actually trying to get something other than that, social validation, that has nothing to do with this other thing we're talking about. And just identify that. Don't put right or wrong or good or bad on it. Just identify it. Social identification is a very important aspect of our evolutionary life. You're not just going to turn a switch and make that go away, but the ego will say, oh yeah, I've already let that go. Until this dragon rears its head and says no. Okay, part of stillness is taking a look at the dragon.
Yeah, and I think that I've known that that dragon is there for me for the longest time, because when I do just a root cause analysis of all of my states of being where I have been the lowest, that has come from an expectation. It's the reward prediction error of not getting the recognition that I feel entitled to at a certain point. And that has bubbled up in so many different ways with so many different narratives that it took me a long time and a hell of a lot of stillness and a hell of a lot of help from you to be able to go in and be like, oh, that piece is there. And that was something that I was so averse to, knowing that that was within me, where it was like, okay, I just don't even want a social media. You know, if you don't want to slip, don't go where it's slippery. You know, I don't want to put myself in that, knowing that social validation is just, it's so important to me, especially as derived from male peers, because that's what boarding schools and fraternities and that type of life will do to you. You know, it's so important.
Sure.
And I just can't.
Why?
I can take it from the evolutionary perspective, where it's like a sense of belonging.
Go into your heart, Henry. Screw the academics for just a moment. Go into your heart. Why is that so important? Because it's a feeling. That's where that feeling is. Why is social validation so important? Not important, it's important to everybody. So important that it's actually getting in your way.
Because I'm looking for something to make me feel more full.
Yeah. Why aren't you full yet?
I want to ask you that question.
Because you're looking for something to fill you up out there. That's all. And it won't. It'll fill you up like cotton candy will fill you up. I suppose you can get stuffed on cotton candy, but boy, are you going to have to find a lot of cotton candy, and then it's just going to go right through you, and it's going to really hurt you. Because ultimately, the habit is looking out there. That's the habit. It's not the validation. It's the habit, which is on automatic pilot because it's more efficient. It's not very efficient to have to just constantly do what I've been doing the entire time we've been talking. Breathe in, breathe out. Stay right here. Don't get triggered by anything that's being said. Just breathe in, breathe out. Stay right here with Henry, my dear friend, and my friends out here. Just stay with them right here. And in so doing, I'm coming back to myself. But I've been doing that now for decades, so it's so much easier. It's pretty much automatic. But I still have to work at it because it's not fully automatic. I still have a body. It's constantly wanting stuff that I don't necessarily want it to want. That's the daily practice of stillness. Something vastly holy gave us breath that isn't just exchanging gases. It is literally downregulating or upregulating our nervous system based on how we do it. What a gift.
So, Jim, I've been pretty diligent about getting still for about 7 years.
You really have, and I'm proud of you for it.
And I have been conscious of this need for social validation, for recognition, for whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so aware of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I guess I've become more aware of it with more stillness.
Mm-hmm.
Does it ever go away?
Your ego is relentless. So is mine. The difference is, multiple times a day, I am literally asking for help in spite of that relentless ego to find something deeper without fighting my ego. Fighting your ego is a losing battle. My ego is starting to come around now. Note the age. Starting to come around now to letting go. Something that I just didn't even have in my dictionary. There is no phrase, let go, in my early life. I drive and I drive and I drive and I make it work, and I've got a crowbar and I've got another one in the back seat. Learning to let go and acknowledge what's here, these gifts that are right there in front of us that we miss because we're busy trying to achieve other things. You've come so far, and I'm not sure you've seen it. You've seen aspects of it, but all within the context of that ego that is trying to gain social recognition. You will eventually learn that that is one of the greatest gifts you can have, because when that social recognition need just goes boom, you are going to fly. You'll feel like flying. I feel like flying right now. And the reason I feel like flying is something that I've been doing for decades and decades and decades that I almost ruined by doing professionally. And that is drawing. I did it professionally, so I needed social and professional validation. I stopped doing it for me and started doing it for those reasons. I've been given the greatest gift in the midst of that biggest problem, biggest egoic problem. I have finally, after almost 60 years of doing it, let go of that completely. I am now a fully committed amateur. Took me almost 60 years to learn how to be an amateur. Amateur derives from amo amare, for the love of it. And I am now drawing for the love of it for the first time since I was in art school. I could have never possibly come up with that one, but there it is. I feel like a kid who just discovered magic, something I've always done, but I'm always hustling, always doing somebody else's thing, always drawing. Not anymore. I can't wait to get down there and just draw for the joy of it. I don't care if anybody sees it anymore. It's just so much fun to do. It's like magic. You have more of that kind of magic in you right now than you can possibly know. And when you let go of that need for social recognition of it, you're going to be doing this stuff because you genuinely love it, not because you want to be recognized as loving it.
Well, I think that there's a point to the persistence where, well, maybe not. Maybe
There is. You're on it. Keep going.
In terms of like, we've been doing this for 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I genuinely, I know how special it is to me to at least acknowledge how tight of a grip recognition has over my behaviors
Mm-hmm.
and my states of mind and being.
Sure. Welcome to the club.
And I think that I would have gone my whole life without knowing that was there if it weren't for you. And so the pursuit of sharing this, whatever this turns out to be, because still life has been a lot of things.
Sure.
And it's a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Whatever this evolves into being, I hope that the throughput is that people find that same aha within themselves, because I know that there are so many trite sayings that have been told to me that I didn't feel until I was ready.
Yeah.
And I hope that this is not necessarily like, here's all of the conclusions that you'll come to, because everybody's path's different.
That's right.
It's more so, here's how to put yourself into the state of mind and being to come to those conclusions.
That's right.
And when that happens, that epiphany is so meaningful. It's so fulfilling. It's
Yes.
so like, I understand me.
Yes.
And I truly believe that to be an intrinsic part of our life force. I think that is evolution. Because when you understand yourself, evolution, you look over time, it just seems as like evolution is telling the story through human. I don't think through all species, but of life understanding itself, of information understanding itself better. It's getting clearer and clearer over time, right? And I think that force it's definitely within me, so much so that we've been through the bloody ringer together.
Yeah.
And we're
We have.
probably going to keep going through this bloody ringer.
Yeah.
And if I can find love here, which I have glimpses of,
Mhm.
especially when it's harder, you know.
That's right.
And I talk about the bloody distractions going on right now. We got helicopters and sirens,
Sure.
but you're still right here with me.
But we stay here.
Yeah, stay right here.
Yeah.
Stay right here.
Yeah.
Finding that meaning and going through it regardless of all of the bullshit.
Yeah.
The one thing that I got from this past week, where I had the living shit kicked out of me from not being socially recognized on small scale and large scale to the extent that I felt entitled to, was I get to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Because if I'm building my dream, I'm living my dream. And that process of living the dream, of deriving meaning regardless of the scale, of finding
Yes.
love and actually being in surrender to, I don't need to have the glamorous tasks, I'll do bloody anything. That has its own sort of energy to it that that gives me life to a degree. So I don't know if the social validation thing will ever go away. I think that the voice will be less loud. I know that there's more distance that I feel to it, like it still goes off, but there have been other things that have controlled me in the past that I don't feel the urge for anymore. You know, alcohol being one of them.
Sure.
And there's more and more distance. I don't want to get into a place of repression because I think I've been there before.
No, don't do it.
Well, I think that's when I was just, or just plain avoidance. You know, not having a social media for me was avoidance, knowing that I wasn't strong enough to deal with it.
Yeah.
Now realizing that I'm not as strong as I thought I was, that's a confrontation with a reality that's a little distasteful.
But remember, we talked about practical spirituality. And the most practical spiritual practice you can engage in is living your life fully. That means all of this angst over what do I do, decision making, all of it. Just keep going. I'm living proof. If you just keep going, it winds up coming together for you. And just keep going and have some kind of practice where you can quiet your mind enough not to be yanked around in here by distractions. They'll be there, but the capacity to quiet the mind anytime, any place is, I think, the single biggest gift I've ever been given. I am so thankful for that, because without that, I'd be lost, pulled from one draw to another. Social validation, credit for stuff, financial security, all of that stuff. When you quiet that down, no fear, no noise, just peace. And from there, you just keep going. And I'm suggesting something, that everyone who's watching this has a sense of absolute authenticity and sincerity from both of us, because it's there. There's nothing more you can do but be your best at being who you are. Everything else is some show you're putting on, your Instagram posting. Okay, best of luck with that. You got to live it. And that's exactly what you're doing. Be as patient as you can, but impatience is part of it too. Took me a long time to let go of that one I told you that I let go of. I am so glad I kept at it. because now it's literal magic. It just makes me happy to think about it, let alone do it.
Well, thank you for being a living example of all of this, Jim. I've certainly gotten a lot from it,
Oh, good.
and I will hope to care less and less about the audience, but at the same time care more and more about them. If
That's
that
the
makes
thing.
sense.
It makes total sense. And remember, the audience is a very special group of people, the audience for what we're doing. I'm not suggesting that our audience is the same audience that wants to watch the latest Ow My Balls video. I mean, it's a very different audience. And they're very careful. They're very thoughtful. They are working toward depth of engagement. They may not just jump to social media and say, oh my God, you've got to see this. This is the coolest thing. Because it isn't cool at all. It's just deeply fulfilling. It's not exciting them into, oh my God, now I can do this, now I can do this. I can't wait to tell all my friends. I just feel at peace. That's a big deal, Henry. That's its own kind of validation. So thank you, and understand whatever it is that you ultimately love enough to keep doing, that's what I want you to do. That's what I'll help you do. I've told you that from the get-go. That's why I'm here. Trust it, though.
Yeah, you start to understand some of these more religious scriptures in a deeper sense.
Yeah.
In terms of walking by faith and not by sight.
Mm-hmm.
There's some wisdom in that.
Yeah.
And I think that the beauty of having the living shit kicked out of me this week was I got to choose not when it was easy, but when it was hard.
Yeah.
And I think that choosing when it's hard and still waking up at, 3 a.m. most mornings this week, and still making sure that I hit everything that I need to hit and still doing my best.
Yeah.
That getting to do that when it was difficult helped to reinforce the belief and also helped to clarify how meaningful it is. And that's always good to see, because I think that this life, it's never going to be, when you get here, then it's just, LSD and daisy fields.
No.
I don't think that really happens.
No. That's why there's LSD.
Anyway, thank you again, Jim, and thank you for just being here. Thank you for sticking to your word in looking for the growth of others and sitting in that chair and sharing all of your wisdom.
I don't know about the wisdom part, but it's been a pleasure doing this. And let me just leave you with a thought. Pay attention to your attention. Please engage what I call attention hygiene. Treat your attention as if it's a body part. Take care of it. Train it. Nurture it. Clean it. Wash it. Feed it. Feed it what it needs, not junk food that will hurt it. Let that attention then do what it's here to do. It's one of the greatest gifts we have. Don't waste it on swine. Okay?
Yes, sir.
And thank you. I love you.
I love you too.
And thank you for putting up with us.
Yeah, if you made it this far, congratulations on not getting distracted.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
So as always, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. Now, if you're looking to build a stillness practice yourself, we have a lot of free resources, audios that Jim's recorded, etc., and you can see those in our show notes below. Along with that, there are also online courses that you can roll in if you want to learn more from Jim. We also have Obsidian mind maps. You can see a couple of them popping up here on the screen. Now, these are really cool ways to look at the podcast information and really just get an overview of all of the podcast topics and deepen the information within yourself. And within them, there are more of Jim's recordings. There's also a lot of Jim's artwork. So if you're interested in any more still life stuff, you can find a bunch of links in the description below. Finally, I really hope that you're getting as much out of this as I have. This is why we started this whole thing in the first place, because the combination of Jim and the practice of stillness had really helped to transform our lives here at Still Life. We just wanted to make as much of that available to you. So hopefully you're getting a lot out of it, and please let us know if there's anything that you want to see more of in the future, or less of. Anyway, hope you have a lovely day. Bye-bye.